She was once the wildest woman in Hollywood, tattooed, untamed, walking red carpets with vials of blood and eyes full of danger. But today, at 50, Angelina Jolie doesn't just turn heads, she stops time. The face that once symbolized rebellion now radiates wisdom, power, and grace, and when you see her today, you might just gasp. This isn't just a birthday, it's a resurrection. How did the girl once labeled too much become a global icon of strength, a humanitarian force, and a mother to a generation? How did the scandals fade and the legacy rise? Angelina Jolie is 50, and the world is watching, stunned. Because what she looks like now isn't just physical, it's spiritual, it's legendary. You think you know her story? Think again. This is the transformation that no one saw coming. Until now, the legacy of Jon Voight's daughter. Before she became Angelina Jolie, the icon, the enigma, the force, she was just Angie. A little girl with haunting eyes and a last name that echoed through the golden halls of Hollywood. Born on June 4, 1975, into fame she never asked for, Angelina was the daughter of Academy Award-winning actor Jon Voight and actress Marceline Bertrand. From the moment she took her first breath, the spotlight hovered like a shadow, offering both privilege and pain. Her childhood was anything but picture-perfect. Her father, Jon Voight, was celebrated on screen but complicated behind closed doors. He and Marceline split when Angelina was just a baby. The divorce left wounds that would ripple through Angie's soul for decades. Her mother, soft-spoken and devoted, moved her children away from the chaos of fame, raising Angelina and her brother James Haven in the quiet corners of Los Angeles. But silence couldn't muffle heartbreak. Angelina grew up watching her mother struggle financially, emotionally, and spiritually, always holding back tears for the sake of her children. It planted something deep in Angie, a fierce loyalty, a defiant independence, a hunger to protect the people she loved at any cost. Hollywood didn't feel like a home. It felt like a performance she wasn't ready for. She didn't see her father as a mentor, but as a ghost with a marquee. There were visits, sure, but no bond. She would later speak openly about the pain of his absence, the betrayal of watching him shine for the cameras while she sat in the shadows. The tension between them would flare on and off for years, reaching breaking points in headlines and interviews, never truly finding peace. Yet the screen was always waiting for her, like it was stitched into her DNA. At 11, she began studying acting at the Lee Strasberg Theater Institute, where she was told she was too intense, too strange, too much. But what others saw as odd, she would one day wield like a weapon. Her teenage years were rough: self-harm, loneliness, a deep fascination with death. While other girls played dress-up, Angelina played with shadows. She didn't want to be famous, she wanted to feel real. Her first break came not from her father's influence, but from raw hunger. She clawed her way into the industry not through charm, but through depth. Even in early roles, casting directors said her presence was undeniable. You didn't watch Angelina, you felt her, like fire wrapped in velvet. She brought pain to life like someone who'd walked through it barefoot. Still, the whispers followed her. Jon Voight's daughter. As if her pain, her power, her presence belonged to a man who barely knew her. It infuriated her. She would spend years trying to erase the shadows of his name and replace them with her own truth. Angelina wasn't just born into Hollywood. She was born in a battle with it. The lights were never a gift, they were a test. And from the very beginning, she was already fighting to survive them. The girl interrupted Angelina's raw talent and real pain. The battle with Hollywood didn't end when Angelina stepped onto her first set. If anything, it was only the beginning. While the industry expected her to be a reflection of her famous father, what they got instead was a storm they couldn't quite name. After a string of smaller roles and modeling gigs that left her unfulfilled, Angelina's breakthrough came in 1999 with Girl Interrupted. It was a film about institutional walls and women on the edge of sanity, and Angelina didn't just play the part, she lived it. As Lisa Rowe, the sociopathic yet magnetic patient, she stole every scene with a rawness that didn't feel performed. It felt excavated. Critics were stunned. The Academy took notice, and at just 24, Angelina Jolie walked away with an Oscar. But behind the gold statue and the smirking red carpet poses was a woman still trying to understand why the applause didn't silence the screaming inside. Fame poured in fast, but so did the darkness. She wasn't pretending to be broken, she was broken, and she was fearless in showing it. While Hollywood polished its stars into mannequins, Angelina bled out the truth. She wore vials of Billy Bob Thornton's blood around her neck, kissed him on red carpets like the world was ending, and spoke openly about knives, death, and the high-wire act between love and madness. People didn't know what to do with her. Some called it rebellion, others whispered self-destruction, but to Angelina it was just survival. She once said, "I've been reckless, but it's always been in the attempt to find something real." She wasn't chasing stardom. She was trying to feel something that would anchor her in a world that often felt unreal. Paparazzi called her wild. Tabloids called her unstable. But beneath it all was a woman who was simply trying to own her pain before it owned her. She adopted a tough shell because she'd learned that vulnerability was dangerous, and yet she couldn't help but let her truth spill out, even when it cost her everything. In interviews, she vacillated between terrifying honesty and piercing self-awareness. She didn't care if people thought she was too much. In fact, she seemed to dare them to say it. Angelina was Hollywood's beautiful contradiction, unpolished, unpredictable, and unwilling to apologize. Her tattoos weren't for shock. They were timestamps of a soul clawing its way through this life. And then came the headlines that truly cemented her as something more than a rising actress, a woman adopting a child from Cambodia, a woman visiting war zones, a woman speaking in front of the United Nations. The girl interrupted was slowly becoming the woman awakened, but the road there would not be easy, and the ghosts of her past, abandonment, chaos, and addiction would not be exorcised quietly. This wasn't just a career taking shape. This was a human being finding her voice through fire, and as the world watched her spiral, stumble, and somehow still rise, no one could look away, not even her critics. Blood vials, headlines, and a love that burned too bright. The woman the world couldn't look away from was about to become someone even she didn't recognize. After the blood vials, after the whispered hospital visits, after the late-night confessions that blurred the line between brilliance and breakdown, came love. A love so fiery, so erratic, it eclipsed everything that came before it. When Angelina Jolie met Billy Bob Thornton on the set of Pushing Tin, no one expected it to last, least of all her. But what unfolded was less of a romance and more of an explosion. They married in Vegas, scribbled each other's names in blood, and spoke of their passion like a religion. It wasn't normal, it wasn't quiet. It was chaos, loud, messy, intoxicating. To Angelina, it felt like someone finally matched her storm. She once described it as feeling alive for the first time, like her insides had been plugged into something electric. But love that burns that hot always leaves ashes. The press devoured them. The world mocked their intensity, turned their intimacy into punchlines. But behind the spectacle was something real. Two damaged people trying to stitch their scars together. Angelina, still unraveling from her own demons, threw herself into Billy Bob's world. She followed him on tour, lost herself in his eccentricities, tried to be what he needed. But somewhere along the way she disappeared, and he didn't notice until it was too late. When their marriage began to unravel, it wasn't a scandal. It was a quiet fracture. One day she looked over and realized he wasn't there anymore. Not emotionally, not spiritually, not even physically. The man she married became a stranger, and the woman who had once been so full of reckless fire now sat alone, empty. It ended as suddenly as it began. No grand betrayal, no dramatic finale, just silence. The kind of silence that reminded her of childhood, of being forgotten, of being left. She later said, "It wasn't that he broke my heart. It's that I had finally built a home in someone, and then the house vanished. But from that wreckage came something unexpected, a new identity, a new beginning. Because in the void Billy Bob left behind, something stirred. Not another man, not another rebellion, a child. In 2002, Angelina adopted Maddox from Cambodia. It wasn't a headline stunt. It was a soul-deep calling. She didn't become a mother for the sake of the image. She became one because, for the first time, she wanted to save someone other than herself. The wild child was now holding a child, and something inside her shifted. The girl who once wandered the world in search of pain had found purpose, and it was wrapped in the tiny arms of a baby boy. The world didn't understand it yet. They were still obsessed with the woman who once wore blood around her neck. But Angelina Jolie was beginning to change. The performance was over. Something real had taken its place, and this time she wasn't acting, she was becoming. A new chapter, meeting Brad and becoming a global power couple. Angelina was already transforming when fate sent Brad Pitt crashing into her orbit. It wasn't supposed to be anything more than a movie, just two stars on a soundstage filming Mr. and Mrs. Smith. But something happened between takes, something unspoken. The world would later call it a scandal. She would call it alignment. In Brad, she didn't find chaos. She found calm. Not the absence of fire kind of calm, but the kind that tames the wild without extinguishing it. And for a woman like Angelina, that was revolutionary. At the time, Brad was still married to Jennifer Aniston, and the fallout from their connection turned into a media hurricane. Tabloids declared war. Headlines screamed betrayal. Angelina was painted as the temptress, the homewrecker, the femme fatale who destroyed Hollywood's golden couple. But behind the noise, something very quiet was happening. A man and a woman, both wounded, both searching, were finding home in each other. Angelina never tried to defend it. She never offered tidy explanations or tabloid-friendly statements. She simply lived it. Brad didn't rescue her. He recognized her. And that recognition changed everything. Together, they didn't just fall in love, they built an empire, a family, a purpose. Angelina, who had once wandered through life like a flame looking for oxygen, now had direction. With Brad by her side, she adopted Zahara from Ethiopia, then Pax from Vietnam, and gave birth to Shiloh, and later the twins, Vivian and Knox. The Jolie Pitt clan became a symbol not just of fame, but of something deeper. They were building bridges across cultures, creating conversations about race, adoption, and identity long before Hollywood caught up. But it wasn't just motherhood that reshaped Angelina. It was what Brad unlocked in her, space to expand. She directed her first major film, In the Land of Blood and Honey, and took her role as a United Nations ambassador to extraordinary heights. She traveled to war zones. She held dying children in refugee camps. She testified before Congress. She wasn't chasing relevance. She was chasing impact, and Brad didn't stand in her way. He stood behind her, sometimes beside her, and occasionally out of frame, but always present. To the public, they were untouchable, the perfect balance of beauty, brilliance, and benevolence. But inside their private world, it wasn't always easy. Two complex people carrying heavy pasts, raising 6 children in the glare of a global spotlight, it was never going to be smooth. But for a time, it was real. It was theirs. Angelina once said, "Brad and I found each other when we needed healing, and we healed as much as we could together." It was never a fairy tale. It was a sanctuary. And for Angelina, who had once been swallowed by the hollowness of fame, love with Brad was not about spectacle. It was about survival. For a woman the world once couldn't understand, she was finally beginning to understand herself. Mother of nations, adoption, activism, and redefining beauty. With Brad, Angelina found a kind of stillness, but it was motherhood that redefined her. Not the red carpets, not the awards, not the headlines. It was the moment she held her first child in her arms. the moment love stopped being something wild and became something sacred. Angelina didn't just adopt children, she adopted entire worlds: Cambodia, Ethiopia, Vietnam. She entered their histories, their wounds, their struggles, not as a tourist, but as a mother. She learned their languages, respected their cultures, and raised her children not to erase their stories, but to carry them with pride. It wasn't performative, it was personal. These children didn't save her. She never pretended they did, but they anchored her. They gave her a reason to become someone steady. Motherhood revealed a side of Angelina that the world never expected. The woman once described as dangerous now rocked babies to sleep in refugee camps. The star who once wore vials of blood now stood before the United Nations, her voice calm, her presence unshakable. She traveled to war zones in heels coated with dust, knelt in tents where survivors whispered their stories, and walked through the ruins of cities most celebrities would never dare to visit. She didn't go for the cameras. She went because she recognized pain. She once said, "When I sit with someone who has lost everything, I don't feel like a movie star. I feel like a human being finally being useful." And somewhere in all that, her beauty changed. It stopped being about cheekbones and red lips and became about strength. She became the face of compassion. Her body, once photographed for its sensuality, was now respected for its bravery. She made choices that shook the world, not for glamour, but for survival. When she publicly revealed her decision to undergo a preventative double mastectomy, it wasn't a publicity stunt. It was a letter to every woman who had ever feared her body might betray her. She didn't hide the scars. She gave them language. She gave them power. Angelina's activism wasn't separate from her fame, it was born from it. She used her platform like a sword and a shield, for children, for women, for the voiceless. She became a goodwill ambassador, then a special envoy, then something more elusive, respected. Not just admired, not just watched, respected. The girl who once wore darkness like armor now carried light into the darkest corners of the world. People stopped asking if she was stable. They started asking how she was so strong. And still, she never pretended to have all the answers. She kept her family close. She raised her children with humility, with awareness, with a quiet kind of courage. She never needed the world to call her beautiful again. She had become something rarer. She had become whole. And yet, even as she built a global legacy from broken pieces, something was unraveling in silence. Because love, no matter how golden, doesn't always survive the weight of the world. The health decisions that shocked the world. Long before the divorce headlines, before the courtroom filings and the public unraveling of her marriage, Angelina Jolie made a decision that would shock the world, not as a celebrity, but as a woman standing in the face of fear. In 2013, she wrote an op-ed in the New York Times that shook the public consciousness. The title was simple. The content was seismic. My medical choice, she called it. But what it revealed was something far more intimate than the world was prepared for. Angelina had undergone a preventative double mastectomy. She didn't do it because she had cancer. She did it because she carried the BRCA1 gene mutation, which meant her chances of developing breast cancer were staggeringly high. Her mother, Marceline Bertrand, had died of ovarian cancer at 56. Angelina had watched her suffer, waste away, and disappear before she had the chance to truly grow old. She couldn't let her children witness that again, not if there was anything she could do to stop it. So she made the hardest call. She let go of something the world had always admired: her body, her beauty, her image, and she chose life instead. The public didn't know how to react. Some applauded, others questioned. A few criticized, calling it extreme, but Angelina wasn't speaking for applause, she was speaking for survival. "I am writing about it now," she said, "because I hope that other women can benefit from my experience." And with that sentence, she didn't just shift a conversation, she ignited one. Women around the globe began testing, asking questions, and exploring options they had been too afraid to face. Angelina Jolie, the actress, the activist, the icon, had become something even more powerful. A mirror for vulnerability, a voice for the voiceless, and she didn't stop there. 2 years later, she stunned the world again, another op-ed, another revelation. She had her ovaries and fallopian tubes removed, a choice that would thrust her into early menopause. She didn't sugarcoat the decision. She laid it bare, the fear, the complexity, the mourning of a part of herself, but also the peace. She was a mother who wanted to live, a woman who refused to be haunted by her genetics. In a town obsessed with youth, curves, and unattainable perfection, Angelina had done the unthinkable. She allowed herself to be visibly changed, and in doing so, she redefined what it meant to be beautiful. Not untouched, not preserved, but brave. Her body was no longer a symbol of fantasy. It was a battlefield, and she wore her scars without shame. For a woman who had once shocked the world with tattoos and tabloid scandals, this was a different kind of shock. Not a rebellion, a reckoning. She stood in the storm, not as a star, but as a daughter, a mother, a survivor in the making. And as her story unfolded across operating tables and open letters, one thing became clear: Angelina Jolie wasn't afraid to break the mold. She was rewriting it, in ink, in skin, and in silence that she refused to let linger. The divorce heard around the world. Even as Angelina carried light across continents, darkness was brewing at home. From the outside, the Jolie Pitt family looked like a global dynasty, untouchable in their elegance and purpose. But inside, the seams were quietly fraying. The same strength that made Angelina unstoppable in war zones was beginning to clash with the silent tensions that built behind closed doors. The kind of love that had once healed her was now asking her to shrink, and she couldn't. The end didn't come with shouting or scandal, it came with stillness. A private plane, a private moment, an incident that would never fully be explained, and a decision made not in rage, but in protection. In 2016, Angelina filed for divorce from Brad Pitt. The world gasped, headlines exploded, and fans mourned a love they thought would defy Hollywood's curse. But for Angelina, this wasn't a script, it was survival. She wasn't just ending a marriage, she was shielding her children from what she had never fully disclosed. And maybe she never will. The media wanted a villain. They dissected every detail, every expression, every court filing. Was it substance abuse? Was it control? Was it ego? But Angelina remained mostly silent, choosing dignity over spectacle. Her only public plea was simple: "I'm doing what's best for the health of my family." Behind that sentence was a storm the world would never fully see. Custody battles, legal back and forth, closed-door negotiations that stretched on for years. And all the while she carried the weight alone, walking red carpets with her children like armor. Her face unreadable, her eyes tired but fierce. Brad spoke less, or when he did, it was softened by publicists and phrased like regret. He admitted faults, hinted at healing, but the rupture between them was never truly stitched back. The intimacy they once shared became a courtroom chessboard. And for Angelina, the grief wasn't just about losing a partner. It was about realizing that even the greatest loves can fracture under pressure. That sometimes protecting your peace means letting go of the person you thought would guard it. Still, she never crumbled. She cried in private, she journaled, she walked barefoot through her garden with her children, and she stayed off the stage until she was ready. While the world speculated, she focused on being a mother. Not a perfect one, a present one. She cooked breakfast, she drove carpools. She tucked them in at night while the headlines screamed her name. She didn't correct the narrative, she outlived it. Divorce didn't break her, it refined her. It stripped away the last illusions that love alone could save her. She had to save herself. And when she did, she emerged quieter, softer, but no less powerful. At 50, Angelina Jolie isn't the woman she was when she married Brad. She's someone deeper, someone who understands that real love doesn't always last, but self-love must. And that truth, more than any role she's ever played, is the one she wears with grace. Life after Brad, solitude, healing, and silent power. After the surgeries, after the revelations, and after the marriage crumbled into memory, Angelina Jolie entered a chapter the world couldn't quite categorize. She didn't rush into another romance. She didn't flood screens with her presence. She simply stepped back. In a world that demands constant visibility, she chose the radical act of retreat. Not to disappear, but to rediscover. There was no rebrand, no press tour announcing her reinvention. She faded from headlines and grew roots in silence. For the first time in decades, the noise wasn't hers. She moved into a new home with her children, a quiet compound nestled near the home of her late mother. The choice wasn't symbolic, it was sacred. Every wall in that house was chosen with purpose, every room made to feel safe. For a woman who had lived in the harsh glare of cameras for most of her life, privacy became her rebellion. And within that quiet, something began to heal. She focused on her children, their routines, their fears, their dreams. She cooked meals, she helped with homework, she drove them to appointments. The glamorous, untouchable Jolie became someone deeply human. And yet, the power never left her. It simply changed its volume. This wasn't the Angelina who once commanded runways with fire in her eyes. This was a woman who now moved like water, calm, intentional, nourishing. The world speculated about her loneliness. Was she broken? Was she bitter? But the truth was quieter than all the questions. She wasn't lonely. She was rooted. For the first time, she wasn't performing for anyone. She didn't need a co-star to validate her. She had herself. And in the reflection of her children's eyes, she saw her worth, pure, unfiltered, untouched by gossip. Directing returned to her life, but now with a different heartbeat. She chose projects that mattered to her, not the box office. She told stories from war-torn regions, from the margins of power, from the voices that rarely reached Hollywood. Her art no longer needed to prove anything. It had become an offering. And the public, once obsessed with her chaos, began to respect her quiet. She began to speak again, but not with scandal, with wisdom, about trauma, about womanhood, about navigating life after loss. In interviews, her voice was softer, but her gaze was steel. She no longer needed to explain herself. She had lived through enough to know that peace doesn't always come with applause. Angelina at 50 is not the product of reinvention. She is the result of endurance, of loving fiercely, falling deeply, losing publicly, and rising privately. She doesn't shout to be seen anymore. She walks with the kind of grace that makes the world fall silent when she enters a room. There is no chaos now, only stillness, only power. And in that stillness, she has become something few in Hollywood ever do. Not just admired, but untouchable. Because real power doesn't scream, it just is. Angelina at 50, what she looks like today. From the ashes of heartbreak, war zones, surgeries, and silence, Angelina Jolie did not emerge unscarred. She emerged radiant. At 50, she walks differently. She no longer floats through rooms like a myth. She walks like a woman who has known pain so intimately it no longer startles her. She doesn't chase attention, but when she enters a room, the atmosphere shifts. Not because she demands it, but because her presence carries weight. People don't just turn to look, they stare. And not because of her face, but because of the story behind it. Time has not diminished her beauty. It has refined it. Her cheekbones still cut like glass, her eyes still hold that cinematic ache. But now there's something else, something quieter, something earned. The world expected her to fade with age. It always does with women who've built legacies on youth and allure. But Angelina didn't fade, she transformed. She traded shock value for substance, scandal for serenity, and it shows. Every line on her face tells a truth she didn't hide from. Every strand of silver in her hair, when it catches the light, feels like a crown. She doesn't pretend to be 30. She doesn't have to. 50 wears beautifully on a woman who has stopped running from herself. In public, she's rarely seen in bright colors or flashy silhouettes. She chooses black, white, beige, the palette of someone who knows their power doesn't need decoration. Her clothes flow like armor, tailored with restraint, elegance, and a whisper of defiance. She doesn't dress for trends, she dresses for legacy. And when she smiles, it's not the rehearsed red carpet flash. It's soft, sincere, a flicker of the child who once believed she wouldn't survive this long. Photographers still chase her, but the angles have changed. They're not looking for chaos anymore. They're looking for meaning. A single shot of her hand resting on her child's shoulder can go viral. A rare close-up, unfiltered, can silence the internet because people don't see a celebrity anymore. They see a monument. A woman who once wore blood now wears dignity. A woman who once lived in extremes now lives in balance. Her presence today is not built on mystique. It's built on memory of who she was, who she's become, and the millions she's inspired along the way. At 50, Angelina Jolie doesn't just look good, she looks eternal, as if time stopped trying to age her and instead bowed to her story. She's not trying to prove anything anymore. She's simply being. And that, somehow, is more breathtaking than any performance, any photo, any moment from her past. This is not a comeback, it's a coronation. The wild child is gone. The wounded woman has healed. What stands in her place is a sovereign force. And when you see her now, truly see her, it's not just beauty that makes you gasp. It's everything she's survived to still be standing, still glowing, still here. The woman who became a movement. What do you call a woman who has lived every version of herself without apology? At 50, Angelina Jolie is no longer just a name. She is a story, a movement, a mirror held up to every woman who has ever felt too broken, too bold, too complicated to be loved. She has been the villain and the hero, the storm and the shelter. And somehow, through it all, she never stopped evolving. She didn't just survive the industry, she outgrew it. In a culture that tries to flatten women as they age, she only deepened. She became more layered, more untouchable, more necessary. You can trace her life in headlines, some cruel, some worshipful, but they only tell part of the tale. The real story lives in her choices. In the children she raised with dignity. In the surgeries she faced with courage. In the stages she walked into not to be adored, but to amplify someone else's pain. Angelina Jolie is not the woman we met in tabloids or action films. She is the woman who walked away from noise and chose to speak only when it mattered. She no longer needs to be everywhere. Her impact lingers in silence. She shows up when it counts. For women, for refugees, for survivors, for her children, for herself, she is not trying to reclaim her youth. She is not trying to compete with the next generation. She is watching them rise and giving them space, because she knows her time is not fading, it's expanding. She's not done, not by a long shot, but she no longer needs to burn with urgency. Now she glows. Look at her today and you don't just see beauty, you see resilience. You see loss etched into grace. You see fire that learned how to whisper instead of scream. You see someone who knows exactly who she is and refuses to dilute it for anyone. That is power, the kind that can't be manufactured, edited, or sold. Angelina Jolie is 50. She doesn't need a comeback. She doesn't need a reinvention. She is the proof that you can live through every kind of storm and still rise, not hardened, but whole. Her legacy isn't in the films or the fame, it's in the way she turned survival into service, pain into purpose, fame into fuel for something greater. And if you find yourself speechless when you see her now, it's not just because she still takes your breath away. It's because deep down, you're not just looking at a woman, you're looking at history made flesh, still walking, still shining, still writing her story in silence that roars, a life that outlived the headlines. There are some names we remember because the world won't let us forget them. And then there are names we remember because they changed the way we see the world. Angelina Jolie is both. For decades, her face has graced magazine covers, lit up film screens, and stirred headlines with every move she made. But those glossy pages never told the full story. The real story was quieter, deeper, and far more human. It was never about fame. It was about the fight. She didn't just grow older, she grew into herself. She didn't conform to Hollywood's rules. She rewrote them. While others chased applause, she chased meaning. While others polished their image, she chose to stand in her truth, unfiltered, unedited, and often misunderstood. She made space for contradiction. She proved you can be soft and unbreakable, that you can carry grief and still lead with grace, that you can lose everything and still walk forward as if you've lost nothing at all. The woman we see at 50 is not a final product. She is a living evolution. She has walked through fire, some set by others, some lit by her own hands, and still she holds her head high, not because she's untouched, but because she's unashamed. Her body bears scars, her heart carries history, and her soul carries every child, every refugee, every forgotten woman she's ever stood beside. She doesn't speak often now, but when she does, it matters. Because she knows the weight of words. She's felt the damage they can do, and she's learned the power they can carry. Her children, 6 lives from 6 different beginnings, are her legacy. Not just because of their names, but because of the love they've received, the awareness they've been raised with, the example they've watched in motion. She didn't just build a family, she built a future. And in every decision, every boundary, every quiet refusal to settle for less than dignity, she carved out a path for the rest of us to follow. There's something about Angelina that stops time. It's not just the way she looks, it's the way she moves. She is not in a hurry. She doesn't need to prove she's still here. Her presence speaks before she opens her mouth. And when she does speak, it's not for attention, it's for impact. She's learned that real power isn't loud, it's lasting. At 50, she is not the ingenue, not the seductress, not the scandal. She is the woman who outlived them all. She is the one who walked away from the chaos without looking back, who built peace with her bare hands and now holds it quietly like a crown no one sees but everyone feels. Angelina Jolie is not just a chapter in Hollywood history, she is the woman who turned survival into sovereignty. The woman who made the world stop, gasp, listen, and then reflect. At 50, she is not slowing down, she is simply walking lighter, stronger, and more herself than ever.